And on today's show, how index annuity income riders operate. Part 4 of this week's series on index annuities with nationally recognized annuity expert Mike McGlothlin. Hi everyone, I'm Steve Savant, syndicated financial columnist and contributing author to Backroom Technician in Innsbruck. Let's get down to business. Well, welcome to day 4, Mike.
It's great to be back.
This is going to be, I think, a kind of a coup de grace of our entire week, because there is so much misconception on how do they work, the taxation issues of income riders. How does this operate? Is it GLWB? Is it GLWI? Is it annuitization? I mean, we're all over the board on this in the way we talk about it with consumers. And I think some of it might be, on the edge of a litigation. So sure. I just want to be able to talk about that today. And when we're talking about it, and we have a huge piece here, and we're only showing you one page. If you want to order this, just write me, Steve at downtobusiness.tv, and I'll send anyone who wants this. We update this quite frequently, and we'll just send you the latest version of it. It talks about all the income rider comparisons, and I like it because it kind of gives you a snapshot. Right away, here's what you get. But Mike, let's walk through the mechanics. I want an income rider. Is there any real quality companies that embed it in their actual contract and I don't have to pay for it?
Well, when you say you don't have to pay for it, you're paying for it in a cap rate or a participation rate. But yes, Allianz has a embedded cost in one of their products, and obviously you have a lesser cap rate than their corresponding products.
Okay, so there are some that embedded in their product, but there's a reduction maybe in their caps or par rates. Okay, fair, but that's fair enough. At least we know it's there. Now let's talk about the second tier. Then there are people who charge. Now, are they charging it against the cash value account, or are they charging the future phantom account? I think that sometimes brings a kind of a disparity in the actual rate of return.
Yeah, I think that's a huge issue in the industry, both on the variable side and in the fixed index side. When you take a look at most costs, they're based upon the higher value of the phantom income rider cost. And whether that ranges from 75 basis points up to 125 basis points, it's off the higher cost. However, it's charged against the client's cash value. So they will likely see a hit to their cash value in the form of $1,100 a year for the increase in phantom value. And as that grows and doubles, you've essentially doubled your cost for the rider over that 10-year period. And so it's really important in a fixed index annuity that you've got some guaranteed growth versus in a variable annuity where you could have some sub-account values far below what your initial premium was. That begins really a snowball effect on eroding any type of capital for the beneficiaries.
Okay, so I need to be up to speed on this then, because there could be a disparity here. And when I think about my actual cost coming out of my cash values on an annual basis on a 10-year lock, that's that, and you said double maybe by the time I get there. That's an expense that I have to weigh out. Hey, this is what I'm buying. Is the value of the benefit worth it? And do a little bit of a calculation on that.
Yeah, and I think also the other thing that comes into play is you need to take a look at client control and client flexibility. Many of the riders charge no matter whether you use it or not, especially on a variable chassis. When you take a look at an index chassis, there are many carriers out there that will refund the charge if you don't use the income rider. So if client goes 9 years and passes away and they have not turned on that income spigot, then those rider costs from $1 or from day one are refunded back into the cash value for the beneficiaries. So that's unique.
Do they still have to hold the annuity though? Let's say
no, they could still go ahead and do a lump sum to the beneficiaries at that point in time.
Or could they 1035 it without that cost?
Yeah, however, one of the things, they could do it with the cost rolled back in and then 1035 it around to like an inherited IRA type of scenario. But one thing is that the Supreme Court just completely shot down any type of creditor protection on inherited IRAs. So we really need to be careful and educate the client on what their options are, because their financial position is completely different than what the actual client's was.
Well, I might have had a revelation here on the set here, so I want to ask you. If I get to my 10th year and I'm ready to make my decision whether I'm going to execute the distribution on that rider, and I go out and I scan the market of DIAs, SPIAs, I'm looking at everything and I see a better deal, can I 1035 that and still get all the money I parked in there for my rider? Can I get that back before I make the 1035?
Yeah, and in those scenarios, yes, you could. If you have not used it with those certain carriers that refund it, absolutely you could. However, we're finding a lot of broker-dealers don't like that particular transaction because that rider value has basically doubled over 10 years, and you're going into a new annuity, and that's a tough benefit to give up.
Yeah, I'm wondering, just the math on that, if I had my return of my money on my rider, because I don't want to use that when I see a better deal with a SPIA or a DIA out in the time that I'm ready to execute distribution. Well, that's all. We're going to have to look at that because I think that might be a play. Now, when we're looking at rider income, you said, there's all over the board. Some people are charging 75 basis points to 125 basis points for the same return. Maybe in the 60s it's 5%. Maybe in the 70s it's 6%. As you get older, the number gets higher. This becomes a real value proposition then, because we're getting the same rate of return, but the disparity is between 75 and 125. That's a lot of money. It's
a lot of money, but what you also have to take a look at is what's the payout strategy? What's the actual check? And riders can be manipulated with not only the roll-up value, the 5%, 6%, or 7% simple interest or compounded over the course of that 10 years. But more importantly, what's the payout? And do you get any deferral credits for holding on to 10 years or beyond? And the other aspect is how do I protect against inflation and rising healthcare costs? And there are some riders out there that have increasing income, and so their cost is going to be more expensive, but there's a valuable benefit, especially if you're planning to turn that on early and have longevity in your family.
Are you saying that that's a combination, though? The rider has an inherent COLA to it?
A COLA, or typically we find that it's still being linked to the indice, so that if the index or the account value goes up 4%, the client's check goes up 4%. If it's flat the next year, then it stays flat. If you're in an uncapped index and the account got credited 7%, your check goes up 7%. So it's a great inflation hedge. And when you take a look at overall inflation plus the rising healthcare costs in the U.S. for retirees, that is something that I think as an industry we're overlooking protecting that purchasing power 10, 15, 20 years down the road.
When we're looking at these options, we really have to put a little bit of a pen and pencil to this, I think. It seems like I have to really understand what I'm getting. Have you seen any clear carrier, any one carrier that really explains this and goes out of their way to really just give us a really good understanding? Because if I did, I'd send it to whoever wants to see it. Because I think these are a lot of mechanical parts here.
Yeah, I don't know the one carrier has done a really good job. However, I think that overall the NAIC, the Insured Retirement Institute has done a good job of getting some client-friendly pieces out. So some of the trade organizations have done a better job than the carriers, I would say.
When we come back from the break, we're going to talk about some of the tax consequences, because this is all over the board, and I think the definitions are not really known, and there's no common place to talk about it. We're going to ask Mike about it right after the break. Back in the day, life insurance professionals were called field underwriters. Then, carriers trained their field force in the basics of life insurance underwriting. Today, the insurance industry doesn't educate the agent population as they once did. But now you can have the Informed Risk Guide at your fingertips so you can illustrate a reasonable rate class for your life insurance prospects. Just request your copy of the Informed Risk Guide at downtobusiness.ashbrokerage.com. It's free from Ash Brokerage, the practice enhancement company. Well, we're back with Mike McGlothlin. We're talking about income riders, and boy, I tell you what, that segment was really helpful for me to get some clarity to it. It is complex, and we're talking about mechanics here, mortality mechanics that are kind of intense.
Yeah, a lot of options.
I want to talk about taxes, because when when we talk about annuities, our whole pitch to clients is tax deferral on a non-qualified plan. So no problem, you don't get taxed until you actually use it. But then, Mike, when we use it, there are so many options. I could go ahead and execute the income rider if it's a GLWB. Now, what are the tax consequences with a non-qualified basis and gain on a GLWB?
Well, it's just treated as just a withdrawal. And so if you have an income value that you'd put in $100,000 and it's grown to $200,000, that $100,000 of gain, whether it's there in terms of cash value or not, is a taxable consequence. It's one of the disadvantages of a GLWB in that you have taxable consequence It's just the last in, first out type of scenario.
So I'm not getting my basis out first. I'm paying the actual
no,
gain.
No exclusion ratio like you would in a SPIA.
None at all.
None.
So I don't. How about basis at the end game? Do I get anything? No, it's all that way.
Yeah, well, you'll get basis at the end once you get into basis. However, the caveat of that is, and again, this is where the uncapped strategy can maybe hurt you. If you have a large gain that particular year, say a 7% or $7,000 gain, and your withdrawal is 10, well, last in, first out, you only have a 30% exclusion ratio because you're only getting into that amount of the basis. So that's where having multiple indices and multiple strategies within a product is really beneficial, because you can use an aggressive type of index and a cap spread type of combination, but then during your withdrawal phase, maybe you want to change that over and have a more consistent, narrower band of returns.
Well, it sounds like I need to think about not only the diversification of that product for my income purposes, but now I have to think about it for tax purposes. Talk about GLWI. What's that issue from tax point of view?
Yep, exclusion ratio. It is an income benefit and is treated just basically like an annuitization. So if you had $150,000 in the contract and your income benefit was $200,000, you're basically going to have about a 75% exclusion ratio, just assuming normal mortality. So there are some tax advantages to doing that. However, the give up on that is that you do lose control. It is an annuitization option.
Now, I could, at the end game, I'm done with my 10 years, I've looked at my GLWB and or my GLWI income, I looked at that, and I went out to Canex and I started shopping the SPIA market for lifetime income. I could look at that, could I 1035, I could 1035 that to this new SPIA for income, is that not correct?
Yes, you could.
Because if it outperforms it, now remember we're annuitizing it, I'd have a blended combination of basis and gain coming out. Again, we're all talking about non-qualified.
Yeah.
So that would be my traditional SPIA. Would there be any reason, I'm assuming it beats the GLWB or GLWI, but would there be any reason to look at a DIA in a scenario like that, a deferred income?
Yeah, because technically a deferred income is just a one-year deferral, more or less. So yeah, you could position that, especially if you have other cash sitting on the sidelines. You can use that as a strategy for maybe taking Social Security early and then continue that deferral to age 70 or vice versa. There's a lot of different planning tools that you can take a look at. But I think that you need to take a look at what the real payout is. After taxes, after inflation, after fee drag, what is it that the person gets? Not so much of an issue right now, Steve, because we're in a low interest rate environment. That GLIB or GLWB is probably going to outpace any type of SPIA. However, when you start taking a look at best worst case scenarios, what are the guarantees? That DIA over a 10-year period is probably going to win in about 8 times out of 10. But again, you're giving up some control and the client may not feel good about that. But if you're somebody that says, I want to take a look at the worst case scenario in a VA and a worst case scenario in a fixed index annuity, I would challenge all of our advisors to start running a DIA and see where that payout is.
Well, I think it's really important because remember, especially if we're taking Social Security and we have a big chunk in non-qualified annuities and we're taking that income, I might want to look at the basis issue of a SPIA DIA or versus a GLWB just because the actual net return might be better. I mean, these are some of the things we have to talk about. So I'm looking at SPIAs, DIAs, GLWBs, GLWIs, and looking at the tax consequences of each one of these, which I think we're not really looking at as far as an advisor. So we have different ways of generating income and we have different tax consequences. And then the third, how does that correlate to my Social Security and wind up on my provisional income test? And is the basis valuable then? It may be.
It may be, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Remember, before moving forward with any of the ideas on our show, always consult your tax advisor, legal counsel, or your broker-dealer compliance officer. Missed an episode? Just go out to our site, downtobusiness.ashbrokerage.com. Want to email me? steve@downtobusiness.tv. And remember, you could be wiser as an Ash Brokerage advisor. I'm Steve Savant. We'll see you tomorrow.